The letters to
This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to the Letters to the Editor workshop, which has become a webinar where you'll learn the nuts and bolts and the strategies for using letters to promote progressive points of view in the mainstream press. And this is a skill that people who even have a little time can participate in progressive activism in a meaningful way. And you can add it to your toolbox of organizing skills and community work. I found there's nothing like the feeling of knowing that you've achieved a bit of traction in public opinion. We all need successes to stay motivated and be productive. Tonight's webinar is co-sponsored by two groups, Kahila Synagogue's Economic Justice Committee and the Interfaith Coalition for Justice in Our Jails, or ICJJ. The jail group's purpose is saving lives and improving the terrible conditions in Santa Rita Jail, our Alameda County Jail, especially for those struggling with mental illness who are imprisoned there. Kahila Community Synagogue, which is a progressive congregation on the Oakland-Piedmont border, has a social justice group called the Economic Justice Committee, and I'm a volunteer member of both Kahila and ICJJ. We will start with a brief invocation to remind us of the deeper meaning of our gathering tonight. And so I present to you Senior Pastor Jim Hopkins of Lakeshore Avenue Baptist Church in Oakland. Jim?
Thank you, Liz. Good evening, all. I'm not sure you're seeing my picture. I have a hat on. It says pastor warning. Anything you say or do could be used in a sermon. It's a reminder that we're in a tradition where words, stories, anecdotes matter. The Jewish tradition, the Hebrew scriptures, the first words of the scripture are God said. In the Christian scriptures, the word is made flesh. And in Islam, the prophet is asked or commanded to recite. We live in a tradition, all of us, where what is said, written, expressed matters, but there's a risk. There's a risk in saying, writing, expressing. There's the risk that we might be misunderstood. But with that risk comes the hope that what we say, write, express will seek understanding and call a new world into being. And so our prayer, our hope this evening is that in what we say, recite, express, there will be understanding and a new world called into being. Lord of us all, make it so. Amen.
Thank you so much, Jim. I'm going to figure out how to unpin you. And that is not easy. Here we go. Okay. Mitch, are you able to unpin Jim's image? Well, let's see. Let me just introduce Bob. The central presentation will be by Bob Britton of ICJJ Member Church, Star King Unitarian Universalist in Hayward. Bob is a former union official, and he now makes his views known through letter writing, as well as organizing inspiring events and speaking truth to power at public meetings. He has been generous with me in sharing his skills and experience, and I'm very pleased to introduce him in a moment. But I just want to remind you to make use of the question and answer because everybody's muted. So we'll keep track of these and we'll pause at several intervals during Bob's presentation to answer as many as we can. And with
we're
that,
using the Q&A, not the chat, right, Liz?
you're using Q&A, right? The chat is just for your convenience. Okay, that's right. Okay, go for it, Bob.
Okay, let's get started, Mitch. I don't claim to have any great magic powers to see that our letters to editor are published, but I've been doing this for quite a while and have had many letters to the editor published. So if you look on the internet, there are guides all over the internet about how to write a letter to the editor from various advocacy organizations. And so that I hopefully captured all of those and wanted to impart to you also some of my personal experiences that I think are important. Why do we want to do this? It's a great vehicle, really. When you think about a publication like the East Bay Times / San Jose Mercury, it has a huge reach, not just on the East Bay, but even into the peninsula. They have sub publications also, and their readership is in the tens of thousands. It's free publicity, really. It's a chance for you to get your thoughts out there. It's also a chance for your organization to get some exposure, what I call branding. And often, at least in ICJJ, we're writing letters to the editor because we want to influence the electeds. And trust me, the electeds pay attention to what's in the news, of course, and they pay attention to the letters to the editor. So you may read something in the paper. I think we've all been there. You read something that gets your blood boiling, or that you think is really well written, that you want to comment on and reinforce, or that you want to contradict and refute and rebut. So it's your chance to do that, to bring up issues maybe that weren't covered, facts that are missing in a news article or an opinion piece that you've read. And then when you get your letter to the editor in the newspaper, people reading it think that you're representing larger than just yourself, and that there's widespread support for your issues. Mitch, next slide. So one of the most important things that I've learned is that whatever you're doing has to be current. Now, some things last only a day or two in the news cycle. Other things can last for weeks or months or even years. But what I think works best is if you write something that's inspirational, you need to do it when you're inspired. And if you take several days to think about it, or maybe you want to consult with various people, I think you're missing the boat, and that you should write it now while you still have that inspiration. You can edit it later. I think it is a good idea to edit. And if you have a person that you rely on, I know in ICJJ, I rely on Richard Spiegelman, about the best editor that I've seen out there. I always maintain, though, that I have the final edit. So what you're responding to or what you're writing about, it must be either a timely issue, or more importantly, better yet, is that it be something that's in a current article in that publication. The publication wants to highlight their work, not someone else's. So, for instance, if you begin your article, which is often a good way to start by referring to the article, if you are referring to an article, you wouldn't want to refer to their competitor. You want to refer to something that is in that newspaper. And so how do we know what's in those newspapers? I happen to have about 4 different online subscriptions to the East Bay Times / San Jose Mercury, the San Francisco Chronicle, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. I've never attempted to send a letter to the New York Times, the so-called paper of record. But you can find out what is timely by finding out what they are publishing. I don't know how many people are familiar with Google Alerts. I only became aware of the idea a few years ago, but you can easily set up Google Alerts. There's a couple of links here, and when we're done, we'll send out all of these slides, and the links will be active so that you can go to the first one being a step-by-step screen display of how to set up a Google Alert. And then a video exists also about how to do a Google Alerts. You can also Google it. The many things that we don't know how to do are easily answered by Googling it. So if you are wondering how to set up a Google Alert, you can just Google Alerts, and you'll find out how to do that. The way you set your Google Alert is similar to doing a search within Google or any other search engine. Like if it's a phrase, you want to put quotation marks around it, but you can search on a name, you can search on an issue, you can search on an organization. I have some Google Alerts set for different elected officials in Alameda County, because ICJJ, that's our focus, is the elected officials in Alameda County. But then there are also some other organizations. There have been lawsuits. The Disability Rights California had a lawsuit against Alameda County. So I've been following them on Google Alerts and get every single news publication that has something about Disability Rights California in it. It may not be something that's pertinent to what I'm interested in, but usually I can tell just by reading the line in my list of emails that have come in. So it comes to you in an email, and then you can open the link and read the article. I had an alert set for one of the supervisors in Alameda County by name, and it turns out that there is someone else, of course, with that name elsewhere in the country. And there is a way, if I had put his name / Alameda County, then I probably could have avoided reading about the guy with the same name who is a weather reporter somewhere back east. Okay, Mitch, next slide. So these are ideas for content. I'm not going to be presumptuous enough to tell you exactly how to write a letter to the editor, but some important points. The first one being, don't bury the lead. That's not a typo. Lead is a journalistic term and a typesetter's term. Back in the day when the journalist was submitting an article to the typesetter, they wanted to distinguish between the lead and the lead of the typesetter's lead. But what it means today is something that grabs the attention and that tells the reader what you're going to be talking about. Not something that's multiple sentences. Usually it can be done in an opening sentence, or a paragraph of a news article, or summarizing the most important aspects of your story. So in a letter to the editor, it's quite different than an op-ed. We might someday do a webinar on op-eds. It's a whole different story with op-eds. The beauty of a letter to the editor, I think, is it's so much easier to do than an op-ed. And it's something that you can do on a regular basis, and it can be done quickly. But about writer's block, everyone gets writer's blocks. One way to get over writer's block, I think, and a good writing tool, is to do an outline before you start. So in the outline, you would have that opening, the lead, if you will, and then the subject matter, which should really be only one subject matter, but you're going to have 2 or 3, 4 points on that subject matter. And then your conclusion is reiterating the opening statement. I call it, it's similar to the ask. If you're in an organization that meets with elected officials, we always say that we want to have an ask. We're not just meeting with them to shoot the breeze. We're not meeting with them because we want to tell them how angry we are about something, but we're meeting with them primarily because we want to ask them to do something, to put them on the spot. And in your letter to the editor, the final paragraph or the final line should be the ask. If we're, let's say, writing a letter and the issue is sheriff oversight, then the final line is going to be related to the Board of Supervisors needs to pass strong, independent civilian oversight. And that can be your closing, and it can be similar to your opening. Now, what the letters to the editors like is some kind of personal link. So if you include how the issue affects you personally, that makes it more likely that you're going to be published, that your letter's going to see the light of day. If you don't have a personal link to the issue that you're writing about, I think it's good to cite something that's emotional. I give these two examples. I don't know, many of you I know are probably aware of these, are deaths that occurred at Santa Rita Jail, which is what ICJJ focuses on. But both of them were very horrendous deaths. And when you put a reference to something like that, it makes it news, makes it, in a way it's newsworthy, but it's readable. It's readable. You want to read about it because it's a human interest story, because it's shocking, because it motivates people to do something. Now, what I like to do, by getting back to inspiration, is to write when I'm inspired and to not worry too much about the length of my letter. We'll get to that in a minute, but some of these publications have very short requirements. The Mercury/East Bay Times, their letter limit is 150 words. They will not accept a letter that is one more word than 150. What I find myself doing is writing something that's based on my inspiration, while at the same time trying to have it organized by first doing an outline. By the way, if you've done your outline, you can almost write the article once you have your outline. But your draft, then you'll find yourself having to go back, of course, and economy of your words. Perhaps there's another way of writing the sentence that isn't as many words. I don't know how if people use a word processor. We'll get to that on the next slide, but you need to do it on a word processor, but most likely the publication is going to require you to enter it on a web portal. That's for security reasons, because they don't want malicious emails coming to them that have bad links and things like that, and that all of a sudden the newspaper is being held ransom. But what that means is, in the writing and the editing process, you use your word processing program, MS Word, whatever you're accustomed to, what you like to use. And then you can do a word count on it. In MS Word, you go up to review on the top ribbon, and then word count will appear to the left, and then it'll give you an exact word count of what your letter contains. So my point about inspiration, I keep saying over and over again, is that inspiration, first of all, it breaks writer's block. Because if you write something when you're inspired, and you don't have to worry about, is it perfect? Or just getting it out there in draft form, then your writer's block is broken at that point. Another point that became familiar with myself just recently is that you submit it to your publication that you think might be reading it, might be publishing it, and that covers the geographic area that you want to have readers view, then it's a good idea to know how they view letters to the editor. And the only way you can do that is by reading letters to the editor that are published in that publication. Because different editors, there's an editor behind this letter to the editor business. They have things that they're looking for. They have some kind of style that they're looking for. And that's why I mentioned about including something personal, making it dramatic, try to have a hook at the beginning. And lastly, I must say that I have had many, many letters to the editors that were completely ignored. And I think you just have to not be discouraged about that. Because the more you do it, the more practice you have, the better you get at it, the more likely you will be published. But because you're not published, take heart and get ready for your next letter to the editor. Be looking at your Google alerts to write the letter that you want to write. You know, you can write the letter that is in your head but isn't yet in the news. You can find it in the news through those Google alerts. At any rate, don't be discouraged. Next slide, Mitch. So folks wanted me to give you an example of a poorly written letter. So this is as it was written in my weekly newspaper, the Castro Valley Forum. I think many of you where you live have a similar newspaper that publishes weekly. And here's a letter that was in today's edition. And I think it's really a poor letter. The title of the letter, as you can see, I've highlighted it in purple. The editor probably wrote this, "Thank you for calling attention." Well, it's a pretty poor headline because attention to what? But if you read her letter, you still don't know what she's asking for. She refers to a previous letter from the week before by this guy, Frank Mellon, former East Bay Mud director, writing about issues in Castro Valley because he lives in Castro Valley. And it was a pretty comprehensive letter, which covered many issues, contrary to what I said a minute ago. But she doesn't say what they are. And she doesn't say why she's raising it as an issue. And then lastly, she says, "I see no obvious choice for president." She's referring to another letter to the editor in that same issue last week. That was a letter, something about the choice for the president in 2024 is obvious, and then went on to write about Donald Trump and why the writer does not like Donald Trump and why we should all reject Donald Trump. She responds to that by just saying, well, they're both horrific, I guess, meaning Biden and Trump, likely the candidates on the ballot at the end of this year in November. But she doesn't say anything about why. Now, I think if she had submitted this to a larger publication, it probably wouldn't have been published. But it's really not a very well-written article. If she wanted to comment on Frank Mellon's letter to the editor the week before, she probably should have just stayed with that and left out the last one, or vice versa if she really wanted to respond to her last point. But then she needs to go into what she's raising issues with, or why she disagrees with, or why she agrees with. Otherwise, it's a pretty poor example of a letter to the editor. Next page, Mitch. So what I call priming the pump.
Oh, hold on, Bob. We've got a question from Meg. She's
Okay.
that it's a poor letter, but why was it published anyway? Do you have any?
Oh, yeah. In another slide, we talk about that, but I'll say it right now. That's one of the great things about weekly publication. I don't think the Castro Valley Forum, my weekly publication, is any different than a lot of other weekly publications. They print many letters to the editor. They print really crappy letters to the editor. They print some really good ones. And what I know is that I have never, ever had a letter to the Castro Valley Forum rejected. Every letter to the editor I've ever submitted to the Castro Valley Forum has been published. So I take it they're looking for letters to the editor. So it's a good place to start with a weekly publication. And I'll hold up talking about that till we get to the next page. But priming the pump can mean making your own news. Now, I wanted to give kudos to Mickey Duxbury, who I believe is on this call. She leads up a group called Stop the Deaths in the Jail, and she organized one of the first demonstrations against deaths in the jail with a couple other of us from ICJJ on May 23rd, 2022. And that was the kickoff of following several other demonstrations, and other organizations actually followed our lead and did their own demonstrations, and groups that we are in coalition with. And so the demonstration is going to make a demand of a public official, but that can also be done via a letter. And then you write a letter to the editor, you've created your own news. You write a letter to the editor and you say, we wrote to such and such official and we demanded. Now, I had the good fortune of having an op-ed published last year in the Mercury East Bay Times. And it was about the 47 deputies who had failed their psych exams, but were hired anyway by the previous Sheriff Ahern. And ICJJ and Faith in Action both wrote a demand letter to the Attorney General, asking the Attorney General to investigate this. Now, we didn't really expect the Attorney General to investigate it, but it was news that we asked for it, and we cited it in our op-ed. So that was the main point of the op-ed, was to lay out all of the horrible things that had happened. You know, there had been a double murder, allegedly by a deputy leaving his midnight shift at Santa Rita Jail, going to his mistress's house and killing her and her husband with his service revolver. So that was an explosive news item that continued to be in the news for a number of weeks. It's no longer in the news, and if I wrote a letter to the editor about it now, it probably wouldn't get published. The other thing that I think is a good thing to try to do is to develop a relationship with the editor. The big publications will have an opinions editor and also a letters editor. And they're people, of course. You can call them on the phone. You can send them an email. I say compliment their work. I don't mean this insincerely. I think it's not good to compliment someone insincerely, but if you have something good you can say about their work or their publication, that's a good way to get on their good side. What I do with the Mercury East Bay Times is, when I'm submitting a letter to the editor, I do it through their portal, but then I also send an email to the letters editor, who he calls me Bob and I call him Jamie. And it's just because we've had a continuing communication over the years. And I alert him that I've submitted a piece in the portal. And he always says, oh, thank you. I didn't see that. Okay, so don't forget these weekly publications or online publications in your neighborhood. The smaller the publication, the better the chance of your piece being published. And just speaking from my weekly, I used to call it the throwaway paper, but I don't want to get on the editor's bad side. It ends up in my driveway every Wednesday, and it reaches every single home in Castro Valley. There are over 66,000 people living in Castro Valley. So that's a pretty big area of publication for us. And imagine trying to do it on your own, but you can do it through the letters to the editor portion of the newspaper and reach thousands of people. Now, some publications will ask, like, are you affiliated with a group? The Mercury asks for a 2-sentence bio. So I always say that I'm an activist with ICJJ, but they usually, in a letter to the editor, they don't usually add that to your byline. If you think they're going to add it to your byline, or if you're doing an op-ed and you're representing your organization, then of course you do need to get concurrence from your organization that what you're writing represents the views of the organization. Otherwise, you're representing yourself, and that's quite fine and to be encouraged, I think. And it cuts down the amount of time you have to wait to get some sort of approval from the organization. So next slide, Mitch. So these are various resources. I think we're up to the last view here. These are various resources of publications that come to mind. For those of us living in the East Bay, I personally believe that the East Bay Times is the publication of record for us. The Chronicle will often cover issues in the East Bay, and if they do, that's absolutely wise to try to get your letter to the editor into the San Francisco Chronicle. The East Bay Times has this 150-word limit, which is very, very tiny. The Chronicle has a slightly larger 200-word limit. I think the Castro Valley Forum has a 250-word limit, but I don't think they're really that hard-nosed about it. And I don't know about the Pleasanton Weekly or the Livermore Independent, but both of those are well worthy of getting your letter to the editor published. So I think that's my presentation. We're going to send out these slides, right, Liz?
Yes, we will send them out.
And we can go to questions and answers. Hopefully I will have some answers.
Yeah, any other questions from folks? While you're thinking about that, I just wanted to add that there are some publications that don't print letters at all. So you should check before you start to get into your draft of your letter, particularly weeklies. Some do and some don't. Some have paper versions and online versions of their publication. So check first what you're getting into. The other thing I wanted to mention is that even if your letter doesn't get published, sometimes it will influence the editor to publish another person's letter on a similar topic. It will sway them that people are really interested in that topic, and hopefully someone else will get their letter in. Okay, here we go. Richard's asking. Bob, how
Don't
long?
forget Joseph Bell.
Yeah.
Hi, I just typed my question. I was just wondering, is it better just to send it via email, or does snail mail work to send in a letter?
I wouldn't recommend snail mail. I think that timing is important. Most publications, though, don't allow you to submit a letter to the editor in an email. If they receive it, they probably are not going to open it. And that's why they have a portal on their website. If you open the publication, there usually is a box that tells you who are the editors and who's in charge of what. And if that doesn't explain it, you can go to their website and search for letters to the editor, and then you'll probably find guidelines about how to do it.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful with the portal.
Sure.
Thank you.
And Richard asks, how long have you been writing letters to editors, Bob?
Well, technically, probably 50 years. But, I'm kind of a news junkie, so I've always start my day with reading my favorite newspaper inside out, and I often get exercised about stuff that's in there and are inspired. Inspired, the word of the day. Inspired to write a letter to the editor. So I have been writing letters to the editor even before I was a union organizer. And as a union organizer, then I had an official role to represent the union. So I was making a lot of writing a lot of letters to editors then.
Thank you, Bob. Karen asks, do you think some of your letters or those of others you do political work with have had an impact?
I know for a fact, as I mentioned before, most of ICJJ's work is focused on the county level. And I know that other people who are online today maybe are focused on another government body or something like that. But in Alameda County and probably in city councils also, there definitely are public comment periods where people can get up in person and make a comment, usually limited to 2 or 3 minutes. Can't say much in 2 or 3 minutes, even less than 150 words. But I have written letters to the editor and then seen members of the Board of Supervisors respond. They don't say, "Oh, and Bob Britton wrote," but they will refer to what I wrote without attaching my name to it, and then say, "Oh, that's wrong," and give their side of the story. So for sure, if they're not personally reviewing this, they have staff that are doing it, and I'll bet you any money that they have Google alerts set also.
Okay, another question from Joseph Bell. Do you get notified if your letters received and rejected are not published? And I was just going to write no, but I think you should comment a little bit on that, Bob.
Generally, you don't get notified. I start looking for my letter, the next publication date. If it's a weekly publication, my weekly comes out on Wednesdays. So I try to get a letter if I'm responding to something there. I try to get it in by Friday, by close of business on Friday, so that Monday and Tuesday, when they're busy putting the paper together, they have it. And I've never gotten a confirmation, "Oh, we printed your letter. You have to be looking for it." However, like I was mentioning with the letters editor at the Mercury East Bay Times, when I contact him directly, he will give me a very broad hint as to whether it's something that they want to print or not. And he often also follows up with me afterwards and will say, we're scheduling it for the Sunday edition. I think Sundays they often have lots of letters to the editor. But generally, that's not the case. Generally, they're not going to tell you.
Okay. So let's see.
Mickey.
Nikki's question, can you mention the development of her relationship with Lisa Fernandez and how helpful it's been? Also, she says that the last letter she got published in the East Bay Times was on Monday about ceasefire. It was sent in as a longer op-ed piece, but the editor got back and said, cut it down to a letter size and he would print it. and which he did. Do you want to address Lisa Fernandez? And,
Sure.
That's worked.
Many of you may be familiar with Lisa Fernandez. She's an editor, not an on-air personality. She's a news editor at KTVU, which I should clarify. It is a Fox affiliate, but pretty independent of Fox News. And Lisa is a fantastic reporter. So the way I have made a relationship with Lisa is through emailing her. You can find her email easily. And for instance, I was online watching a court proceeding in federal court, and they mentioned this was when Ahern was still the sheriff in Alameda County, and the attorneys in court mentioned to the judge that there had been still another death in custody. And this was not public information yet. So I called up Lisa and told her about it, and she was very thankful. And then she did a follow-up article about it. So then over the years, I call her or send her an email or vice versa. Now, I see Mickey also asks about, wants me to mention what happened with her piece. She wrote correct me if I get any of this wrong, Mickey, but Mickey submitted an op-ed, a much longer piece than the 150 words that the Mercury allows. And she didn't hear hide nor hair of it, which is one of the problems with op-eds. Well, they're a lot of work, and then you don't know if it's going to get published or not. But then some weeks later, it got condensed and published as a letter to the editor. And I happen to know that the letters editor has been out. So the opinion editor, who is his boss, has been intercepting his stuff. So, and also, I guess, deciding what gets in the letters to the editor. That her example breaks the rule that I said about it being current. It wasn't so current because by the time it got to the letters to the editor, I don't know how much time Mickey had transpired, but a couple of weeks anyway. And but the difference is that it was still newsworthy. It's still in the news. So sometimes it can be something that you read that you didn't get to and that's now a little bit old. But if it's still a topic in the news, if it has legs, they say, then that's something that they'll consider for a letter to the editor.
Okay. Leslie Rose asks, when is it too late to submit? For instance, if it's been more than 3 days since the story you're responding to.
Oh, no, I don't think 3 days is too late. I think you want to be writing your letter, submitting your letter to the editor, I'd say within a week. And what they like best is the letter that cites an article in their publication. So I think on one of the other slides, there was an example where I wrote this is a hypothetical letter to the editor, but I wrote a letter to the editor saying, I was so upset with the Board of Supervisors and then I cite the article where the article is a news article citing something that happened at the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. So it's a way to give credit to the publication that they, of course, like to see. And maybe I mentioned one other thing that wasn't in the slides, and this applies more to op-eds, but can also apply to a letter to the editor. And that is, what are your facts? What's the basis of your facts? They don't like to print letters that push false facts. They want to know that there is some basis to what you are asserting. And with the letter to the editor that I did have published in the Mercury East Bay Times, I had an ongoing over several days of communication with the opinion page editor. He wanted to print my op-ed, but it made several factual assertions. And he didn't want a link to those, and he didn't have room for me to go into a big explanation. What he wanted to know was, for the safety of his publication, that they weren't printing total facts drawn from the Ethernet, from the ether, that are BS, in other words. So I was able to substantiate my claims, and then he went ahead with publishing the op-ed. And it can occur. It has occurred with me once or twice at the Mercury East Bay Times, where with a letter to the editor, I make an assertion and they'll ask about it. And so then I don't need to edit my letter. They're not usually asking for that. They're just asking for me to substantiate to them the basis for my claim.
Yeah, I wanted to address a couple of questions also. Joseph had asked about email, and I want to remind everyone that because of security concerns, they rarely will read emails. They want you to submit through their portal, which is like a link on their website that gives you a form, and there's different fields to fill out, and you're going to cut and paste your letter into one of those bigger fields, and your name and so on into the other fields. And
so, you know, publication these days will print an anonymous letter. They want to know who's writing it. They want to know where you live, not your address, but what city you live in. They want an email address and a phone number. Usually the communication is via email, but sometimes if they're wanting to print your letter to the editor, but they just need one little piece of confirmation of one of your assertions, they might call you on the phone.
Okay. And the other item, Leslie asked, when is it too late to submit? I actually did a tiny study of about 10 different letters that had been printed in the New York Times, just a few days in a row. And a lot of them were not that timely. I think about 4 out of 10 were very timely. A couple of them were quite old, weeks or even months old, and a couple of them didn't refer to a previous article at all. So I think it's hard to know when it's too late to submit. I think it has to do with whether your topic is still newsworthy. And
well, I'm not saying, Mickey's example is a good one. And we know that with Mickey's example was an item that was still newsworthy. All I'm saying is that the sooner the better. The better chance of publication comes with sooner submission. 3 days, Leslie, I don't think 3 days is necessary. I would say try to get it in within a week.
Yeah. Okay, I think we have finished with the questions for the moment, and I want to go over some topics that are in the ICJJ mission right now, or our permanent mission, because we're hoping that you'll help ICJJ and with our mission to improve conditions at the jail and help our neighbors stay out of jail, those who especially have serious mental illnesses. And you can contact us if you would like some assistance with your letter or interested in ICJJ or in Kahila. So I want to share with you the topics in just a little more detail. ICJJ emphasizes the urgent need for supported housing and treatment services outside of Santa Rita Jail. They need to be in the community, and people suffering from substance abuse problems, as well as mental illness, and people who need supported housing are getting scooped up and put into jail, where they say they're treating them, but as we say, you cannot get well in a cell. But most people, the vast majority of people can be helped so that they don't become homeless or get drawn into the criminal justice system and that harmful revolving door. So for another point is, for those who are imprisoned, the jail must be safe. It has to provide proper medical care, which in many cases is neglected. They have to stop traumatizing and hurting people, including so many people of color. Third, we need to educate the public what to look for and local government candidates. The jail itself is controlled by elected officials, Alameda County officials, and in each county has its own jail in general. And they control the budget for community services. We can't, as a nonprofit organization, support specific candidates, but we can point voters to websites that discuss electoral issues and candidates' views, like the League of Women Voters, which I think already just put out one of their summaries and fact-filled websites about the upcoming election. So you want to urge people to get the facts and not just read about the campaign slogans of each candidate. Ballots are going to be mailed February 5th for the primary election coming up. And Alameda County has several Board of Supervisor seats coming up in there. So this is the time to be talking about that. So I would like to challenge each of you actually to make a goal for yourself to write several letters coming up. I'd suggest maybe 2 letters in the next 3 months, or make your own goal. That's realistic for you. The reason is doing this, practicing this will consolidate your learning and make it into a skill that you can use when appropriate, whenever you want, and if not now, when. So if you want to write your goal in the chat to kickstart your decision, that would be really nice. So we also want you to let us know about your successes, because we all need that inspiration. We could publicize that within ICJJ and Kahila. Send us links to your published letters, and that would help bring about more feeling of success and more inspiration. So I want to conclude on time, and so I thank you for attending, and thank you in advance for any letter writing that you do. And we will send you a follow-up email outlining the key points of tonight's presentation, links to a number of items, a number of websites, including Kahila articles and the ICJJ website itself, and the links to those publications that were in Bob's last slide. And now I could take any further questions. Seeing as we have a couple minutes left. Oh, nice. 2 letters in the next month and 2 letters in the next 3 months. Thank you both. Everyone can see the questions, I think. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Reverend Hopkins. Big thanks to Bob and to everyone who helped put this together. Thanks to Mitchell Craymond, our website host and extraordinary helper in getting this thing online in a proper manner. So with that, we'll say goodnight and thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye now.